building on a couple of years of an effort, a project called Insurgent Midwest. The idea of the project was to bring activists from South Africa, Mexico, and Midwest together, and then as they produce knowledge about their struggles and formation of the transnational solidarities, these dialogues could maybe help us find our ways through how could we build a more humane world, or what we call it humane urbanism, as opposed to the bully urbanism that we have now, which is based on forcing people out of their homes, evictions, and displacements. So that project have had its own, challenges, but we are very fortunate to be able to move forward with that idea. And in the last yesterday and today, we had the gathering of activists from South Africa, Housing Assembly and Pathways to Free Education from South Africa, Cape Town, and also Autonomous Tenants Union from Chicago in specific. They have been for the last few days in Chicago and the last couple of days in Champaign, talking to each other and exchanging strategies, visions, etc. So we are in the next day, tonight and tomorrow, we are embarking on something that we call it the public part of this interaction. So if the meetings yesterday and today were closed, today, tonight, and tomorrow are open. And it's a symposium, as you have seen the advertisement, called Constructing Solidarities for a Humane Urbanism. Usually in traditional symposiums, you have a speaker that gives the keynote. In a musical metaphor, that person will play the keynote, that the rest of the symposium will kind of get into, the rest of the music would basically tune to that. I'm not a musician, so that is how I understand keynote. But so we thought the keynote for this event, for our symposium, is the voices of activists from various parts, from various struggles. So that is the opening panel of the symposium. They will give the keynote or the main themes and of conversation for what will unfold tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And the location would be Temple Beale Hall on campus, and there is program at the door, at the entrance door, you can enjoy. This effort also has multiple arms to it. So there is also an art exhibit from on the same theme, from Middle East to Midwest, evoking solidarities across time and place. And that art gallery, one of the artists is with us, Nasrin Nawab, and her sister Nahid Nawab. They joined us with the theme of transnational solidarities, and they produced artwork, which is on exhibit at YMCA in the art gallery, and it's open tonight till 9 p.m. You could go after here, and also tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So that is another one. At the entrance door, there are pamphlets for Pathways to Free Education. If you would like, you can pick up one and enjoy, and also it's the program for the symposium. Before I turn it to the panelists, Ken would be facilitating that. I want to thank, I don't know how to thank people who have helped this happen. We started by, when we started thinking of the project and then later on of the symposium, of course, the members of the project, which was Stacey Harwood, Mark Dussard, Ken, myself, and a group now from University of Minnesota. But I want to give my most heartfelt thanks to students who have helped this happen. Without Efadou, it would not have happened. Without David Aristobal, where is David? It was impossible to have any of this multi-handed, multi-armed event to happen. Daniel Gonzalez has been also instrumental. Aileen Rowden, she has been incredible in documenting and videotaping and inspiring all of that. And currently live streaming the event, so if anybody is not here. So also Atiye Ashtari has also most recently joined the team of students who have made this possible. So a round of applause and thanks to all of them. They say behind every successful man faculty is a team of wonderful students who make it possible. So I leave it and we get started with the rest. I hope I didn't miss anything. Thank you.
Thank you. From my side, thanks a lot. We are very excited to be here. On a personal reflection, let me just say the people that you're going to hear from, they don't have any, well, they don't have hair my color. So what I'm trying to suggest is this is an intergenerational dialogue, but this is also the youthful activism that we see, and we are very excited in this multi-vocal and talented group. So I've got the impossible task that we have more or less the majority of the world represented here, and we have given them each 10 minutes to represent, and that's totally crazy. So I've asked them to be disciplined, which is not very easy for activists. That's what they sort of teach. So we had asked them to think through 2 questions, and I'll just read the questions aloud again. The theme of it is this issue of solidarity, and we've been workshopping through this for the last, well, several days. So the first one is at this moment, who do you work with? In other words, which movements, organizations, and groups? And then secondly, what are the challenges and opportunities? So current, present, maybe a little bit of your historical past, but also the future direction. So I'm not going to take much more time. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and we can go in the order that you're seated, if that's okay with you. And then I think we'll open it up, well, we can, if you do the math correctly, each one gets 10 minutes, we should have a lot of time for interaction and discussion. So that's all from my side. So open to the people.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Tembelani. I'm from the organization called Housing Assembly, based in Cape Town, South Africa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Antonio Gutierrez with the Autonomous Tenants Union.
Alejandro Monzon with the Autonomous Tenants Union.
Janae Strong. I'm here with Grassroots Education Movement, also the Washington District.
Demia Fanima, and I'm here with the Students for Justice and Housing.
Hello, my name is Brian Hamasi. I'm a student at the University of Cape Town.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Marlon Mitchell. I'm with First Followers, a local not-for-profit agency here in Champaign, Urbana.
Currently, the organization, we are working with progressive grassroots organization. Back home, we are working with an organization that called Reclaim the City. Also, we are working with the social justice movement that advocates for basic services like water and sanitation, including electricity. We are also working with student movements that advocate for free public quality education in South Africa. We are also working with the unions because we felt strongly that there are people that are being low paid, the low paid workers that are actually infected by the housing backlog because they can't even access the mortgage bond because the banks have some kind of a limit for them as to you can't access the mortgage bond because you don't actually qualify. So there are kind of standards and stuff like that. Also, we work with progressive NGOs that play a major role in terms of political education, also helping out in terms of how do we expand ourselves through their expertise. Hence, they've been playing a major role in the society for longer periods than we are. Also, we are working with the Human Rights Commission in South Africa that helps us mostly on the legal part of our struggles because when we embark into our actions, we sometimes get caught and convicted, so we need lawyers that can actually defend us and protect us. So we organize across different constituencies because we strongly believe women are affected by housing in a different way than the student. So we organize women, we organize students, we organize the disabled, we organize the youth, we organize the low-wage workers, as I've indicated. We organize everyone that is actually falling under the unfit living conditions in the area. I don't know, Komke, if I speak to all the two questions, or maybe.
Maybe say a little bit more about the challenges
Okay.
that your organization facing.
Both questions.
Oh, okay.
Opportunities.
He's asking if you should talk.
Oh.
Both questions, yes.
Okay, the both questions. So, first of all, we'll speak because we talk about the transnational solidarity and stuff. So, in our context, first of all, I would say that solidarity would mean to us giving support to the oppressed and exploited groups that are actually advocating for social justice. So, we do that in various forms. It could be a direct action that will mean doing the localized picketing, probably embarking into a protest. Also, we do pamphlets for the public information in such a way that we can get masses behind as to we support this as a country or as the left movements that are actually affected about these issues. But then we do come across challenges. Because you'll find out somewhere, somehow, there will be the gatekeepers, most especially when we work with the unions, because they've got this bureaucratic attitude whereby they wouldn't let or open up a platform or a space for us to actually organize workers to be part of the campaign because of protecting their positions in the union. Also, one of the challenges that we're facing is to organize across racial segregation, because in the city of Cape Town, it's one of the most segregated city, whereby you'll find there is a place of the so-called white only, coloreds only, and blacks only. So it makes it difficult to actually organize ourselves in a manner that could have a greater impact because of such segregations, and also the media ignorance, because hence we are the poor, and then they are actually not interested. And then one thing about South African media, it is being captured by the politicians, whereby what you will see on TV is something that they would want actually people to see. But then the reality of the issues of the people in the working class, people that are really suffering, won't be covered. So you'll find out you are being ignored by the media. And also a lack of resources for immediate actions sometimes, because you'll find out that there are some struggles happening across the country, but then due to resources, we can't actually organize ourselves immediately to show solidarity to those comrades that have been struggling for such a thing. But then, as Housing Assembly, we organize in such a way that we demand our independence, whereby we are at the point now of creating our own media, telling our own stories, because we saw that we can't rely to the media that is supposed to be actually helping us out. So we use most the social media and also the print media, whereby we write real stories from real people, and then we make our own publication. And also, speaking of sustainable transnational alliances, there is a big challenge there, because you'll find out probably as ATU, because we had a recently emerged working relationship, but then how do we sustain that relationship? So we find it as a big challenge, hoping that having spent time with the ATU since we arrived in Chicago, that we could find, but we did talk about it, but then we hope that there could be some kind of practical activities showing that, yeah, this thing is really happening. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you. Oh, this is basically our philosophy as Housing Assembly. The big fish and small fish. So we are, in our principles and values, we are anti-capitalist, anti-racial, anti-sexism. So for us, we felt strongly that several movements, several communities have been fighting for social justice in their own corners. It's like you see, here are the students fighting for the education, here are the informal settlements fighting for decent housing, here is the youth, here are women, here are the disabled, but then all these people are scattered, and then they give the power to the capitalists and the government to actually demobilize them so that they can rule and divide them. So we felt strongly that if we could organize all those different constituencies as I've mentioned, and then we become disorganized, so it will mean for us we can combat the capitalist ruling and then have the people's governance under the people's power. Thank you.
Again, my name is Antonio Gutierrez, and so I'm coming from ATU, the Autonomous Tenants Union, which is an all-volunteer anti-capitalist tenant collective in Chicago. We believe or fight for housing justice from below and to the left, and we do this by empowering tenants and those directly impacted by eviction and gentrification to lead the campaigns and form unions in their buildings. Many of the times we're working with tenants that are also undocumented immigrants, and so they tend to have a lot more reservations into organizing because they don't want to create any problems or make themselves visible to all their threats like deportation and ICE raids. But they tend to have no other option because they tend to live in buildings or multi-unit buildings that private corporate landlords are buying from former local landlords of Albany Park, which is located in the northwest side of the city of Chicago, one of the most diverse neighborhoods, and not just in Chicago, but in the nation. And they tend to not have written leases. Many of the times these tenants have lived in that building or in that unit for more than 10 years, 20 years, and so therefore, even if they had a written lease at one point in their tenancy in that building, at one point they just didn't bother asking for it because they tend to think that it was going to be a permanent location for them to stay. The new corporate landlord takes advantage of this, knowing that the tenants don't have a written lease, to give the tenants 30 days notices, and therefore mass evicting all of our community members from those buildings that eventually are either in the position of having to find housing within just 30 days, or having to buy the eviction by getting the support that they need to do that with the Autonomous Tenants Union. When we talk about the collaborations that we have, we work with housing organizations in the city of Chicago, and right now we're working on the Lift the Ban campaign. This is a campaign that is now forming across the state to get rid of the provision at the state level that prohibits municipalities, including the city of Chicago, from passing legislation around rent control, which we currently don't have anywhere in the state because of this provision. We also work with national housing organizations such as the Right to the City Alliance that connects us with other housing organizations across the nation like Causa Justa, City Life Urbana, and others for us to exchange and share challenges and also the work that we're doing on the ground. Just in this month alone, will we be participating as part of this alliance on the Renters Week of Action that will go on from September 18 all the way to September 24. Now we recommend, if you are interested in learning more about that, to go into the Right to the City website to learn more about that. But as far as on the local level, after the elections of November of last year, we started activating a local defense network response to the threat of the increase of rates that we know are happening regardless of what the city of Chicago and Rahm Emanuel's administration are saying around our self-status of the city of Chicago as a sanctuary city. Rates are only increasing in the city, and we're still seeing ICE and the police department of Chicago collaborating into giving information to ICE in order to go kill and terrorize our communities and detain and deport our community members. And Albany Park is also a threat not just for evictions, but also for ICE raids and deportations. And so we started working very directly with Organized Communities Against Deportation, OCAD, which is also an organization leading the work of anti-deportation work in the city of Chicago. And we joined with other organizations locally in Albany Park to create the Albany Park Defense Network, or APDN. And we're still giving workshops to the community around how do we even identify ICE, what do we do if ICE is carrying a raid in our community, and if they do detain somebody because we were not able to respond to that raid, what is that process of anti-deportation work? And so that's where the APDN is kind of mobilizing and really interacting with the community of Albany Park to start having these conversations around anti-eviction, anti-deportation as a form of anti-displacement work that is changing the rhetoric around what we people think, especially around eviction and gentrification, because a lot of people still think of gentrification as, you know, it's good for the neighborhood and it brings economic development. But at the end of the day, it is at the expense of the displacement of long-term residents of those communities. And so highlighting that there's other ways of displacement like deportation and eviction, it is increasing the knowledge of the community at least to be aware of how displacement takes place in our community and to be able to address it in a local level as well. Yeah, and then with that, I think we'll open it up to the challenge with Alejo, but when we talk about challenges, I think one of the main challenges that we see when working with other organizations and why collaborations like Housing Assembly, like OCAD, as an anti-capitalist organization, right, we tend to have very different strategies or like set of strategies to other organizations that might be more reformists. We will not be working within like elected officials or calling them our champions or working on policy level work because our tenants don't even have sometimes the right or the privilege to vote in this society, right? Because of their immigration status. And so that is something that we see as a challenge as far as what organizations we can actually work on, because we see our values of anti-capitalism, of dismantling processes such as eviction and displacement is something that it needs to be addressed head on and not to just try to fix it. Yeah, but with that.
All right. Well, it's really hard to follow my compa. He's really eloquent. And I thought we only had 5 minutes. And maybe that was intentional because we're not disciplined as activists. So the only thing I really have to add is that, for instance, Antonio mentioned that we inserted ourselves into the alliance to lift the ban on rent control. But we firmly believe that it's not going to happen unless we build a base in the community with mass organization capable of putting pressure, to pass that reform. And so that's one of our main challenges. Building a base is it's not a whole lot of organizations are doing it. They focus a lot on media work, directly on electoral campaigns, but we firmly believe that the theory of change is that with the masses we're going to be able to get what we need to get done. And so as far as the population that we work with, a lot of them are in different life situations than we are. A lot of them have kids. They're undocumented, they face deportation, they face fear in the community. So there's a lot to overcome. There's a lot of fear to overcome. We have to inspire these folks to get involved in the organization, to see their own self-interest as tied to the interests of the broader movement in Chicago to pass rent control. Or, who knows? Once we build the base, there might be other alternatives that we can think of collectively. So I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Johnny Strong again, and I'm coming in as wearing multiple hats, which is the blessing of the work that I do. I represent UIUC 100, and I also represent Grassroots Education Movement, which are both based in Chicago, Illinois. And the way that I come into this work is actually out of a moment of being a Black millennial and really being being faced with the question of what is my place in space in society. And that coming out of the first murder and then of Trayvon Martin and then the acquittal of George Zimmerman, which really spawned a lot of organizations to form, whether it be Black Lives Matter or my organization under the banner of Movement for Black Lives, which is now how we call ourselves as a coalition. And so we began to ask this question, like, what is the protection of the state for young Black lives? And that was a question that spawned a lot of work that led to political work, direct action, education, justice, and all of these work that I'm now kind of involved in. And it expanded in this really beautiful way that I'm just really, really excited about. And I'll talk more about challenges and opportunities. But I just want to first and foremost say that I do believe in the divinity of the universe and of time and of, the protracted struggle and how we keep coming back to a place of asking these questions of how do we go back to indigenous ways of being to create alternatives that address the questions and the problems that we face. And so in the work doing Movement for Black Lives with my organization, we actually started to expand this notion because on the right, there was kind of like sweeping moves to target specific communities and terrorize them. And we started to understand that this is not just an isolated thing, this is an attack on all of us. And so one of the ways that we started to manifest that through our work is we started to work with, again, organized communities against deportation around expanded sanctuary. That sanctuary is not just applicable to immigrants, it's also applicable to non-immigrant communities. And we're talking clearly about the occupation of the police state to protect the interests of the political structure in communities, but then also corporate interests who get paid through the mechanisms of state violence. And whether that be deportations or ICE or being disappeared, or like ultimately state violence and murder. And so we started to really dig into this and we found some really, really alarming things. One such thing is that in the city of Chicago, the current mayor, who has been reelected twice, actually spent $500 million in police settlements for police murder to young Black and brown people in the city of Chicago. And that the main holder of these accounts is JPMorgan Chase. And the dollars that go into that are tax dollars, but the interest that you get on that is held by JPMorgan Chase. And so not only are you profiting and upholding a state that is being violent to its constituencies and occupying that land, but there's a financial interest for that to continue, right? So even when we're thinking that it's a win to get money for reparations for harm, we are still continuing a system of harm. And so that work has become a big piece of how we illuminate the way that this police state works, the way that corporate interests are involved. And then it starts to expand some more. And we decided to start linking education to this. And this is the kind of like the work that I do with Jim. So we decided to actually look at, in our communities, what are the safe places if we are accepting that policing is not a space of safety, ICE is not a space of safety, there's no sanctuary, what are the safe spaces? And so we started to look at schools. And in a city where there have been massive closing of schools, that was another big question. Like, how does school play into this? And so the way that we started to connect it is there was the murder of a young Black woman, Rakia Boyd, who was in her community, and she was murdered by police officer Dante Stervin. And we did a march there. We have been doing this march like months on end, going there. And we decided to march from that police board to Diet High School, which was the last open enrollment high school on the south side of Chicago that was slated to be closed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel, even though there was a 5-year vetted, community-led process for what they wanted that school to be. And so we did a march from the police board to the high school. And we all were in circle, and it was one of the most beautiful moments that I was able to encounter because it was Black folks, it was brown folks, it was folks speaking on Palestine. It was like all type of issues, all type of people, and all type of campaign asks. And we were able to fit that into something that was cohesive and something that was like, it got not just here, but it got you like in these places. right? And it's very rare that we get those moments because we're always pushing for this is what we need to do, this is the person we need to call, this is what we need to shut down. And it's very rare that we get moments to be human and to feel and to build and to like really leverage power in a way that's beyond what a strategy chart can convey. So it's a really beautiful moment. And so then once we began to do that, we started to push on it even more. And there was a campaign around mental health. And on the South Side, there was no trauma center, even though there was all this talk about Chicago and its violence. There was no trauma center on the South Side or the West Side to address violence. So, in effect, if you are a victim of violence, whether it be state violence or interpersonal violence, you didn't have a place to be treated, right? And so that campaign also got folded into like this moment where we are like really building power. And it dovetailed in this way that impacted so many spaces in Chicago that we were so full of hope for what could happen. Like we actually saw a win in the state's attorney who was actually over the state's attorney when Rakia Boyd and both Laquan McDonald, their murders were like really high intensity and visibility. We were able to get her out of office and we were able to build base. We were able to like consistently have actions and shut things down. And then what we found is that there was a challenge in such, we were not thinking big enough even still, right? And so we found that the right is not only able to execute a promotional campaign and a campaign of rhetoric, not only do they have the dollars, not only do they have the institutions, but they also have a very long-term vision that exceeds 5 to 10 or what we're going to do at City Hall next month, right? And so that was a provocation for us. What is our vision? And so the vision for Black Lives came out, and some agendas came out, several agendas came out, and we're now in that space of trying to articulate visions and also build the spaces that reflect those visions. Because when you have a vision, it's just that, and then you have to concretely itemize the steps that it takes to get there. And as we're very honored to be able to push a conversation of actually putting in folks' homes the question of what could we do in a world without police, that's still a very hard question to answer as we're still sustaining trauma. And so I think I want to push there that the challenge for us now is to not only resist as a priority, but put reimagining and rebuilding as a priority that's just as urgent. And it's hard because time and people, I'm a mother of 2 children, you know, like it's not the thing that you can fit in 8 hours of a day. And so I guess the other challenge that I think is an opportunity is to build base, going back to that point of building base, like we need more people. And so these are kind of sort of the things that we're thinking about. Just want to make sure. And then, for possibility, I just wanted to really impress upon us, like, the possibility is greater than we can imagine. Like, the possibility is anything. And I think that's a strength of the right, is that they're so arrogant, they feel like they can do whatever they want to do. And they do it, you know? So, I think the possibility for us is to really believe that anything is possible. And then be like, okay, so now what are the steps to get to that anything? As opposed to thinking, how do we just do this one singular thing or work in this one silo or just come together for this rally? But how do we really get to the anything is possible? And I think the opportunity that we also have in doing coalition work and building solidarities is some reconnecting and some remembering and some reimagining that connects us to our cultural and indigenous heritage in ways that we are not afforded in society as it's been constructed for us.
And the Students for Justice in Palestine is a national educational organization full of student activists that are fighting for the liberation and self-determination of the Palestinian people. And we do this by trying to raise awareness on our own campuses. And we do this by rallies, demonstrations, divestment campaigns, which we had last year called UIUC Divest, where we called upon the university to divest from companies that support Israel and other human rights violations. And it didn't pass, 57 to 43 vote. And we do plan on holding another divestment campaign because just like small steps at our own university would also raise awareness on campus, because last year lots of people became educated about the Palestinian cause once they signed the referendum. And we work with organizations. We work with organizations that are national and just like on campus. So like for a national one, we work with Jewish Voice for Peace. And Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization of Jewish people that stand against Israel and Zionism. We work with Black Students for Revolution. We work with META, which is Movimiento Estudiante Chicano de Aslan. We work with Black United Front, Campus Union for Trans Equality and Support, Black Rose Anarchist Confederation, Build Programs Not Jails, Black Lives Matter and Champaign, Urbana, United Muslim Minority Advocates, United Minority Relief, and Native American Cultural Centers. And we also work with the National Students for Justice in Palestine, and they hold a workshop convention every year, and we elaborate and share ideas. And we work with these organizations because they help us readdress our leftist radical politics, and we all stand in solidarity and agree with women's politics. And for Black Lives Matter, we obviously care about that, and in establishing solidarities, we also can acknowledge similarities in our struggles. So for Black Lives Matter, we have police brutality in the US, but we also have IDF brutality in Palestine by Israeli Defense Force soldiers, and that is a huge problem. As well as in Israel, Black Jews are treated way poorer than white passing Jews. And for Build Programs Not Jails, over 2,000 Palestinians have been incarcerated in the past month, and it's just increasing. And the living conditions in Israeli prisons are despicable, actually. And recently, Palestinians worldwide went on a hunger strike to protest their conditions. And they went on this hunger strike for 40 days in order to raise awareness and to improve their living conditions. And on top of that, for the incarceration, they will feed the prisoners salt and water. Just they won't give them actual food. They'll burn them with the ends of their cigarettes to force them into false confessions. And that is also a larger problem in itself. We also work with LGBTQ programs, as in Israel tries to pinkwash the occupation. So a lot of people will be like, oh, Israel likes LGBTQ rights, but that doesn't dismiss the occupation that we currently have. And we also work with these movements so that we can mobilize masses together, support education, and we host events together through rallies. And we recently had a rally on Tuesday against anti-fascism, and we were able to correlate white supremacy to Zionists and how they both are settler colonials. And some opportunities we had in mind would be to establish a larger solidarity between these organizations we work with, and work with other organizations that are worldwide and not just on campus. For example, hosting a Black Palestinian solidarity workshop to show the struggles, which are not just police brutality, but relating it to apartheid in South Africa. And a lot of people like to say, oh, Israel's not an apartheid regime, but recently they tried to put Black Jews and Arabs on one bus and white passing Jews on another bus, but the Israeli government wouldn't pass it because they said it would make South African apartheid too much. And another big challenge that we have as an organization would be Palestinians standing for their own cause in America. Because although we are privileged to be in America and not under a regime in Palestine, we can get blacklisted on websites such as Canary Mission. And when you get blacklisted on the checkpoints, on these borders, they just see if your name's on there and they will not let you pass. You'll be stuck. And this is also another problem, as a lot of people don't like to call it a genocide, while thousands and thousands of Palestinians have been killed and barely any Zionists have been killed. And the checkpoints could also help us work with other organizations, as they're borders. And these checkpoints are really dehumanizing. And it's like Zionists basically resembling Nazis, putting guns to your face, making you pass on buses and these checkpoints, and it's really bad. And there was actually an event in Palestine history called Gothic Qassam on this border, where hundreds of Palestinian women who were pregnant were killed on the border while passing. And when we do also, we want to expand with groups such as MECHA, and other Latinx organizations worldwide to talk about these border walls and how they dehumanize us. And there's actually an apartheid law in Israel that separates Israel from Palestine. And anybody who has a Palestinian passport is not allowed to cross into Israel, such as myself. So like, I have a Palestinian passport, and although I have an American citizenship, because I have that Palestinian passport, I'm not allowed in Jerusalem or Israel or any other part. And that is an example of segregation in itself. We'd also like to work with feminist groups. Recently, Nassimi Ande is a political prisoner who was actually, in 1969, there was an attack, and they imprisoned her because they thought she had ties to it, and they had to actually sexually assault her in order to have her do a false confession. So it's also important that we address feminism within Israel. And we'd like to also work with national human relief organizations because Gaza right now is actually deemed unlivable. Like the light will go out in Gaza for 4 days and it'll be normal. They'll actually be privileged that's not gone with me. And it's actually one of the most condensed areas. And also with education organizations because Israel actually this past week shut down 3 schools. They just demolished them and created settlements on top of it, as well as evicted all the kids, and now all the kids are like having class outside in makeshift like classrooms. And there's also a problem of the millions of Palestinian refugees worldwide in other countries. And our biggest challenge would honestly be like the opposing Zionist organizations on campus. For our Tenants campaign, they had the funds and we didn't. So they convinced a lot of like organizations, they convinced like frats, business school, engineering school, that they would lose their scholarships based on this, which is not true. And they did this with their funds, and they would actually print out Snapchat posters, and they would print out like apparel and stuff that said "Say no to divest." And they would, and a big problem within that is accusing our organization of being anti-Semitic, which is the only excuse that Zionist organizations have ever had against SJP and Palestinian organizations. And this is basically just an example of them trying to excuse criticism of Israel, and that's the easiest approach they can think of. And actually our organization stands against anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia as well. And BDS has actually helped with this and raising awareness of them. And we need to work with these groups and establish a solidarity to help people educate themselves about Palestine because a lot of people still do not know what's happening when it's gone this far and this crucial. And so we have to stand with these other causes to build a movement and stand in solidarity with one another to fight for liberation and Palestinian self-determination.
So the collective pathways to free education. Some of you would have had that booklet. It was collected outside.
Let's keep it up to
Sure. Yeah. It is a collective of students, academics, some community organizers that have come together to discuss the issue of free education and some of the questions and struggles that relate to that. But what I'm going to try and do is try and build up a little bit of a historical argument about where does that come from and why are we using the language that we're using to describe something like free education. So education, in the way that I'm going to talk about it, so the institutions that arrived through the processes of colonialism arrived in South Africa in about 1658. And the first school, according to South African History Online, so you can check that page out and see how credible you feel that it is. I think it's pretty credible. It's called, it was a school set up by Jan van Riebeeck, who was part of the first settlers from the Dutch Empire who arrived in the Cape. And they had captured slave ships from the Portuguese Empire on a ship called the Amersfoort. And this school was essentially used to train slaves how to perform the functions necessary to establish a trading post. It's between 50 and 100 years later where the European settlers had gotten to a point where they required schools to upskill the settler population to do certain kinds of tasks. Right, so and they received support from the Dutch Reformed Church. That formed the basis of the first set of public schools, or public in the sense that I think you understand when I'm saying that. When the British take over the settlement in the Union of South Africa, we start having, there is an expansion of the public schooling system, and there's a shift towards sort of rationalism and secularism. So it's a shift away from the Dutch Reformed Church, and I'm from the University of Cape Town, so I'll use that as a vehicle to describe some of that. It's a frontier school, and I hope that it will paint some of the picture. So that a school founded by the church becomes what is known as the South African College of Students. Right? You can see already some of the shift. What it does carry with it from the church is that it's only men. So it's within the settler population, but they're only men who enter into the school. Liberal arts, science, and mathematics. Out of the South African College of School is the University of Cape Town. And some of the first departments that come into existence are departments like anthropology. It's only subjects like the STEM, math, science, engineering, technology that come much later off the back end of some of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Right? But what is happening alongside some of this is that South Africa, if you know a little bit about the history, the colonial history is also the history of the mines. And I think that there will be some resonances here about the gold rush. So the institutions, the educational institutions started to reflect some of the needs of the state that was growing to establish itself. There was a need at some point for artisans. So there were artisanal schools. But then you needed civil society, so a huge part of the apartheid, there's been a lot of talk about apartheid, was the creation of the homelands. So when people were displaced, indigenous Africans and many other immigrants and indentured people were displaced from their land, they established homelands which had tribal authorities, and to populate the new states inside the homelands, they needed institutions. So they created a tier within higher education that would provide that function. And those were referred to as the Bush colleges. There were strikes on all of these aspects almost from the inception, right? So a collective of organizations called SACED, and some of you will have that in your booklet, A Popular History of SACED, comes in kind of response to what was felt as being a substandard education. So you can have all these ideas about inequality and so on, that there's an idea that there are some types of humans who have less capacity than others, but history will tell us that has always been rejected. So there were movements that later connected with other kinds of struggles that interpreted things differently, Black consciousness movement, the labor movement, that were thinking about how to make use of education to organize for broader systemic change. So in 1994, what the massive challenge that the new government was facing was that they had a stratified education system, that there was education that was being provided to people on the basis of their race, even up to a departmental level, right? So you had to go to a separate area, there were separate offices for black students, separate for colored students in certain areas and so on. So there was a unification. Now we have one basic education system, one higher education system, right? But what comes with that is that they were not able to transform some of the, number one, the epistemic basis of the university. So what do I mean by when I say that? The ways of seeing and the ways of knowing. So they take lock, stock, and barrel, the university and the systems as they exist, and they adopt a paradigm called transformation, or social transformation, which includes a policy of redress using affirmative action, which brings more people into the space, but also, that's academic staff, but also the increasing of access into the institutions and the establishment of TVETs, technical vocational education and training. I don't know if you have them in the United States. But that's, I would say it's analogous to what an artisanal school would have been maybe in the 1960s and 1970s. But there's a division at this level, that the universities are the place for the thinking and the creative ideas, and some of the other institutions are the places closer to the working class areas, usually meant for, closer related to the market and more explicitly so. And in those spaces, like the TVETs, the Department of Higher Education will say there's no need to have programs that have a literature component and so on, because they don't need to perform those kinds of functions. And those kinds of ideas have reinforced some of the older ideas about who's able to think about what, who's able to access which history. If we look at some of the discourses that people are saying when they're talking about free education in our context, they're also saying what are we learning? When we're learning about history, we're only learning about European history. And this is where the term decolonization comes in. And you would have seen there was a bit of a furor about statues in South Africa, where we had removed the statue of Cecil John Rose. We can go into that maybe in question and answers, but it really wasn't about the statue at all. It was being used as a vehicle to talk about dispossession, to talk about the basis of the society in which we existed, and as an attempt to connect with some other struggles that were happening at the same time, like the massacre of Marikana, which I'm sure many of you would be aware about, which relates directly to the mines, which relates directly to the legacy of people like Cecil John Rose. So I think that the important part of what I'm trying to say here is that when we are talking about free education, we're using it as an entry point into what is a very turbulent part of South Africa's history, a part where people are also looking for a new language to describe what's going on. It's been interesting to hear a lot. We've been here hearing about the use of the term apartheid. I think that in my experience in the circles I move in, that students are going in a bit of a different direction. We're not looking to use the term apartheid as such, but apartheid is a manifestation of colonialism, right? A deeper rooted interpretation of where did these things come from. Because there seems to be, we found a bit of a limitation that you come to when you look at things simply through an apartheid lens. So part of this free education comes off the back of the student movement was connected to the labor movement on the campuses. And when they reached their apex, there was a whole lot of repression and a whole lot of factionalism. And that is unfortunately too long for me to go into in 10 minutes. But what was significant about what the state was able to achieve off the back of gains like bringing the workers into the institution, which led to some of their salaries being doubled, was that it closed off the spaces for debate and for discussion, which was a very lively and important component to think about what's happening just prior to that. And that often when you see, especially black movements, when you see them reported even by academics, but in media, that they're described as a mass, sort of unthinking, and that it's always in the context of either violence or some sort of counterinsurgency. But no, these were spaces of intense engagement, of debate, the bringing together of people who are not traditionally meant to be inside the university, where workers can have a voice and have a say in the decisions that would shape the movement. This became harder to achieve over time. But collectives like ours, and there are many that are out there, and I encourage you to do your own research and find out what's going on there, is to try and accomplish, number one, speaking back to a system that is saying that it's only certain kinds of people can produce legitimate knowledge. But also, number two, that it has become very easy with social media and also the kind of political climate that we have for me to make a position today and change it tomorrow, even as the strike leaders. And I think that we are saying here that we need to develop a culture of put a position down, say what you mean so that we can engage with it, flesh it out, develop an analysis so that when you are engaging with other movements, like when we're working with the Housing Assembly, they know, even I might disagree with Brian on A, B, and C, but at least we have a basis for moving forward. Because I think that things have sort of moved into a little bit of an existentialist domain within the student movement, which is, I think, characteristic of the sort of petty bourgeois space in which it occupies in relation to the rest of society. So there's that aspect. The other aspect is to also try to get an entry point, as I said, to engage with other movements. So there is a campaign for free education which many people outside of the university have resonated with. Now, what comes after that is the deep responsibility of trying to fulfill some of what that means, which also means consulting people and getting their perspective on how they want to make the movement move forward. And what we found was that when people are talking about free education, they're not talking about the kinds of institutions that we have, that we're sitting in now. They're talking about something much more fundamental. They're talking about how do their experiences, their histories, so we're talking about indigenous knowledges, how do those things come to the fore, and how do we make our society one where we can also collectively self-reliant. So how do we get better access to food? How can we build our own houses? It's one thing to say that we want public housing, but we're in a situation where half of our population, half of our youth population are unemployed, and there's no prospects for developing institutions that are going to be able to make us build those public houses. So these things are intersecting. These things are communicating to one another. And I like this concept that you introduced me to now of the long, protracted struggle, and I think that that in terms of the pedagogical aspect, this is it. This is putting our ideas out on the table. We've set it out there, and we'd love to engage with you further.
All right, so again, my name is Marlon Mitchell. I'm actually a PhD student, my 4th year here at the U of I. Hopefully I'll be finishing up in a couple years. I like to consider myself wearing 2 hats. One, I consider myself an academic, but along comes with academic comes a critic. So I'm very critical. I'm critical of systems. And I say that because who all has heard of this thing called mass incarceration? All right, so many of us have heard of this. So over the last 30 to 40 years, generation after generation as a black man, I've been able to experience this personally, my family, my friends, my community. So here in 2017, well actually 2015, working with some other local agencies, we talk about Solidarity, some of the organizations that we worked with in the past and still work with, the CUCPJ, Build Programs Not Jails, Black Lives Matter, Muslim Society, American Society, and there's others that I might have missed. But one of the things that I would like to really highlight is just the historical context of how First Followers came to be. 2012, the local sheriff here had an agenda where he wanted to build a $20 million jail. This is in 2012. The actual county jail was built in the early 80s, 1980s. So to me, looking back, that's fairly brand new for a building. But to ask for $20 million from hard taxpayers' money to build, to incarcerate more black and brown bodies in low-income communities through social oppression, basically. This is what we see. So James Kilgore and myself and a couple other agencies, one of the things we wanted to come and said, why put more money into prisons and jails when there's no programs for people, no opportunities for those individuals? And so we came about, and then the reentry program came about. So we've been running this reentry program since 2015. And a lot of things that we have experienced with the reentry program is just people needing the basic needs. Employment, education, housing, all these different factors that we need, just basic necessities that we need so that we can provide for our families and move forward with our lives. So, we talk about some of the challenges with working with other organizations. There's a lot of ideas that are floating out there. But one of the challenges that we found is that those who are formerly incarcerated have very little voice in the direction that they want to go. What I mean by that, you see a lot of these different agencies, and I like to call them bureaucratic agencies, where they're fighting for all this money, but at the end of the day, the folks that need the services are not getting the services that they need. So the thing that we did, we built our agency from the ground up. We like to call it a grassroots organization. My philosophy, after gathering a team of folks, was that we were going to do this from the community. We were going to do this asking no money from anybody but ourselves. It's a volunteer-based organization where we don't have much funding. But the beauty of that is, can't nobody come in with their own agendas. It's a collective agenda that James and my leadership team comes up with. It's folks that come and volunteer their time. It's folks that have been adversely affected by mass incarceration that really, really pour out their time, money, and different ideas. So those are some of the things as far as challenges. Another challenge that we also have is sustaining the momentum. I mentioned 2012, the sheriff wanted $20 million, where he's back again in 2017, asking the same thing. But he's repurposed it. He's put it in a different package, but it means the same thing to me. So, the opportunity. The opportunity that I saw was that coming from the community that I come from, the opportunity was that I needed to step forward and bring the voice of those that are impacted in my community forward. So that's kind of what I do. I advocate, I educate, But at the same time, I encourage those folks, those families, those people to come forward and share their stories. And what's unique about First Followers is that it's all mentoring based. And what I mean by that, most of the people, our core group, are individuals that have been formerly incarcerated. They have been formerly incarcerated, some of them 4 or 5 time recidivists, some of them that have done 20, 25 years in the penitentiary, but they have a voice. They have a lived experience that they would like to share. Because incarceration, believe it or not, is intergenerational. And it's those folks that bring change, bring about turning the tide, dismantling and deconstructing that system. Let's see here. So, one of the things with my mentors, what I like to encourage them to do and help them understand is that you are closer to the problem, so you have the solution. There shouldn't be anybody coming into your community, as all of us spoke, telling you what's best for you. You should be leading that charge. So one of the things through education, what we do is we train them up, we train them to do research, we train them to go out, do professional development through speaking engagement as such, and to provide voice. And it's only then do we make those different changes. We're still in infancy stages, but one of the things that we would like to do, and I would like to share with you all, is that through all of this process of developing the program that I co-direct, is that I had a great mentor. Rebecca Ginsburg, who's on this campus, she was one, and also Susan Burton. Has anybody heard of the New Way of Life out in California? Well, Susan Burton, she has a model, a reentry model. She's been doing this since the 1980s. And what her thing is, she has a reentry program for females, for women, returning from incarceration. I would encourage all of you all to pick up her book. Just came out maybe a couple months ago. It's called Becoming Miss Burton. And it talks about these systems. It talks about how communities of color, low-income communities are impacted by a system. And it's been going on for the last 30 to 40 years. One of the things that really struck me here locally, besides the sheriff asking for $20 million, was through my research, I found that the Illinois Department of Correction has a population of 50,000, close to 50,000 individuals that are incarcerated, when the system was only built for 32,000. I also found out that the governor for the state of Illinois spent $1.4 billion in 2015 to incarcerate individuals. And of that $1.4 billion, only 3% was given to programs. So when we talk about programming and spending money, only 3% of $1.4 billion is coming back and going into programs. And what do I mean by programs? We're talking about education programs. 50% of the individuals that are incarcerated in the state of Illinois have a 6th grade reading level or lower, no higher than 6th grade level. A quarter of the individuals that are incarcerated in the state of Illinois have some sort of mental health condition. Here in Champaign, at any given time, you have between 5 and 550 people on parole. The governor of this state is on record for saying that he wants to reduce the prison population by 25% by 2025. Those numbers are coming down. But where the opportunity is once a person comes back into the community. So we, at First Followers, are picking up that torch, and we want to be that place where they come. In the last 2.5 years, James and I, we've seen over 150 people come through our doors, looking for employment, looking for those things for their families, housing. And I think some of the things that we talked about with this housing thing, one of the policies here in Champaign County states that if I have a felony conviction or if I have been incarcerated, I cannot go back into public housing 5 years after my sentence. And what I mean by sentence, that's not the day that I'm released. That's after I finish my parole. And parole can go 3 to 4 years. So if I've done a 10-year penitentiary sentence, come home with a 3-year parole, I still can't get into the housing complex in these communities that I'm from for another 8 years. Makes no sense. But these are things that I like to share as an advocate, as an educator, to panels and audiences like you, because these are the different things that go on that leaves me scratching my head. But at the same time, on a national level, in these debates, they're very rarely addressed. So, with that being said, again, I thank you all for coming out.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole. I'm with the Economics Tenants Union. Thank you so much for letting us be here. It's been really wonderful the last few days just to learn from everyone and just hearing how many opportunities we have to collaborate with each other is really great. So, that's it.
Amanda. Amanda. Down capitalism, down. Forward with the housing struggle, forward. Good afternoon, comrades. My name is Kashfa, and I'm also from South Africa, staying in Cape Town. So I'm just blessed to be here and share the experiences. And you know, I'm still grappling with this, I don't know, this university. What I'm telling it to everybody, but maybe I can just share it with you. This university has a city of its own.
The city of the own.
Yeah, the students are very privileged to have these things. But I think we should not forget also where we come from. When we enter an institution like this, where we are being conscientized, what it can be like when we leave. Because at the end of the day, we're going back to the houses where we stay, where gentrification is happening in your area, and you visualize the best you can have because the opportunity that you had at the university. But I think also it's about conscientizing one another, having the space about talking through these things, and join these communities and these organizations where we can talk as one voice. Because at the end of the day, gentrification might not be on your side now, but in 4 or 5 years' time, you will end up having that. And comrades, you must remember also, it might not be you today, but tomorrow it will be you. And if it's not you, it will be one of your families, and that families, you will be responsible for that families because that will be another burden on you. So maybe we need to think about that. But I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
I think language is important in these struggles and the terminology that we use. And I want to set a tone for tomorrow, sort of. I, as one of the co-founders of the Take Back the Land National Movement, have moved to a place where I don't use the term gentrification. I believe it's the term of the oppressor. It's a term that's given to us to make us think that what is happening is for the good. How about the phrase ethnic cleansing? Because the result of what is happening is you're ethnically cleansing neighborhoods around the country. And it's a process, right? And I think that provokes thought in people. And I think as we go through the struggle, we need to think what is really happening and what is the effect. Gentrification, as the term is, causes displacement. What happens to the people that gets displaced? Where do they go? So I think we need to start to humanize this a little bit. And that's the way that I myself personally have gone through this work, and I come from a lived experience. For those who don't know me, I spent 2 years on the streets of Miami homeless and 10 months in the New York City homeless shelter. So I come to this work from the lens of a lived experience, and having gone through certain processes and seen how they play out, particularly to certain sectors of community. So I want us to think about terminology and using words that provoke thought in people, right? Because I think we're too easy to use the term gentrification. It just flows too easy from us. So it's the word that the oppressor has given us, and we've all, all embraced this word. But realistically, you're ethnically cleansing neighborhoods. And what is the effect of ethnically cleansing? So, thank you.
I work with first followers here, but this is a great occasion for me because it's bringing together sort of a couple of strands of my own life. I mean, I lived in for 11 years in South Africa, lived and worked in Cape Town, worked on some of the same issues that Comrade Tembelani in particular is working on. And so to see this and then connect this with the work that I'm doing here around re-entry and mass incarceration, it's really inspiring. It's inspiring to see that the struggle continues. It also is frustrating that we haven't come farther than we have, both in South Africa, post-1994, and here in post-racial USA, right? So we have to just keep pushing forward, as we say in Southern Africa, a luta continua.
This question of education, it seems to me, is key to the work ahead, right? I think recognizing that perhaps the majority of people here consider themselves to be educators, but what is the politics of this education? And Kashifa has so brilliantly raised about having a city for yourself, right? And the responsibilities that goes to that. So that's the one part that seems to me a key focus. I think, and based on earlier discussions, if I can just maybe, there are two themes. One seems to me this idea that we have to return to the source, meaning that we have the power in ourselves. That seems to be a key aspect of most of the work that's being done there. And I think, to quote somebody here who used the phrase, we have to keep on building the base, right? So, I don't know, those are just three, if you want, the rubrics that I throw out there. And I guess for now, unless the panelists have anything they want to respond to, I'll open it up. So, it's wide open. Please go ahead. Perhaps just introduce yourself.
Jean Boucher. I'm a sociologist from Michigan State. I mean, I just want to push back a little on education as the solution. It's really hard to educate people living in poverty, right? So I'm a class analyst, and we can continue to try to educate, but as long as we have extreme inequalities, the rich are going to stay educated, right? I mean, it's just, anyway, I agree with you, but we have to add the class lens to the analysis.
Okay, so the limits and possibilities of education, I guess. I don't know, maybe it's one way to take a bag of three questions and then invite others to respond. Is that perhaps, I want to recognize David, go ahead.
Yeah, David Wilson from this campus. A quick question about strategy and how an institution can actually make change. And I think that there's some controversy about this, and I'm wondering how your institutions come down on this. So there's very often a standard position that resistance has to state in very clear terms who is progressive, what is progressive, and what needs to be demonized. And the institutions, for example, multinational institutions, that we need to transform. But critics have said that very often that vision, that frame doesn't work. That what's more appropriate, if one really wants to induce important change, is to actually work on the consciousness of people on the ground that becomes not so much fruitful to demonize institutions, but to really try to colonize common sense and common sense of people and affect the habitus of people in everyday life, which is a bit different as a strategy than the first one. So I'm wondering how we move forward on really making important change.
Okay, maybe one more question. Wait for, or anything else? Go ahead.
That's what I expected.
Getting back to...
Just introduce yourself.
I'm Dara. I used to go here. I work in Chicago now. But getting back to base building and talking about, we were talking about reimagining earlier, and I like that point. I would like...
Can you stand?
Yeah. I would like those of you who organize to kind of talk about how you build accountability processes into the way that you organize communities and build your bases, and how we can keep the most vulnerable, even in our own communities, in mind as we organize for various different things.
Okay, it's difficult because the questions weren't necessarily directed, so I don't know, but I'll try and answer them in a Of course, there's a class dynamic to it. I think that's the attempt at trying to do the, Sam. Of course there's a class dynamic to it, but that's the whole point of trying to take the historical approach, is that I think that sometimes we maybe miss each other by not appreciating the difference about, if we're talking, we've gone through some of this debate in the closed sessions, but when you're talking about housing in this place and housing in that place, a lot of those dynamics that play out on the ground, as you say, are particular to the histories of those places. So when you're engaging with those spaces and conversations and contestation on the ground, what you might interpret as being demonizing is how people are experiencing those particular spaces. And they're not demonizing it. In some cases, they were never meant to be inside those institutions in the first place. So it's difficult to know, or to locate, I guess, what I think you mean by demonizing. But I think that in terms of the way this institutional change happened, this is why I was trying to make this point of the entry point, and maybe I should have expanded on that a little bit more. Is that, yes, in your particular area, you cannot avoid, I'm a student. If you're a student at a university, if you're a student and you're at a university, right? There is some utility, and history tells us this, that these spaces can be used to advocate for certain kinds of change. So an option that you can make use of is to organize where you are and connect on that basis, connect with other kinds of organizations. So that the basis, I suppose, for us being here is that Ken introduced us to some organizers in the Housing Assembly, and we're in the process of building some of those relationships. Those kinds of things take time. So some of the things that come out of relationships like that is working on pamphlets that relate to the experiences that come out of joint educational spaces between some of the students and the housing activists. So when they're running a campaign on privatization of water in the city, and they need help and resources doing mapping out what are some of the companies that are starting to procure water in the city, that this is something that students can help with and help capacitate some of the organizations so that they can do this kind of stuff on their own. So I think that this is a question about the base buildings, also about where we are located and what we can offer to the struggle. But I think that it helps that when we define our position, even if it's interpreted as demonizing another organization or institution, and we move from that basis. Because I can't know when I'm speaking who feels demonized by what I'm saying. I can only know that through the process, the dynamic process of dialogue.
Anybody else? I'll just say that I think as far as education and consciousness goes, in the first two questions, you don't understand. I think it depends, I guess, on the word, what you mean by education, because you can educate yourself and struggle. And that's what we believe in. We engage with people who are facing eviction or who want to improve their housing conditions because their landlords aren't doing shit. They're not maintaining the buildings, they're not doing anything. So if they want to change that's a way they're gonna, raise, expand, whatever verb you want to use, their consciousness, And so part of the base building in our perspective is engaging with people in fights and, letting them take ownership over the fight, not us. We provide guidance because we have experience with it. But they're ultimately the ones who are going to fight, and we think they're the most likely ones who are going to stay part of the organization and help build the base. And I don't know what the compa over here meant about demonization, but I think we should probably demonize the landlords. I mean, I'm sorry if there are any landlords in the house, but if you think that you should be able to make money off of a house that should belong to people, I mean, it's not working. It's not working. The private housing market is not working for people. It's causing a lot of homelessness, while there are millions of homes that are vacant.
Tell it, bro.
So that's our perspective, and maybe you can consider it.
I think I'll just quickly tap in as to the question of progressive institutions and stuff. I think in our context as to when we speak about progressive institutions, because you'll find out that there are, I'll make an example of an NGO that would come with an imposed agenda, not actually have learned the experience and what people want. So for us, we believe that a progressive movement or a progressive institution will be an institution that will actually acknowledge the experience and also will open up a space of public participation whereby we all get a common vision and a common goal as to where you are heading other than parachuting or imposing your own agenda. So that's what we mean about progressive movements.
I'm going to give anybody else those 3 questions there.
Yeah, so I'm really trying to think about how to approach this question around education and consciousness. Because there's so many ways to think about education and consciousness, right? Like there's so many avenues and ways by which you become educated, by which you find entry points to articulate what you know. So I think there's a level to it that I really appreciate around the conversation around free education and who owns the public space of educational institutions, and then who gets to think who is supposed to access or own what knowledges. I think that's a really good thing that came out of this panel that I'm chewing on, have thought about, and continue to think about. And then there's this also lived experience that is just this wealth of knowledge that is connected to a generational knowing, an ancestral knowing, a heritage knowing that kind of creates the current by which people are able to articulate things that may be seen as a demonization from folks maybe from an outside perspective of that experience. And yet both these knowledges are important in terms of translating into action and the path forward. But I'm really thinking about base building, and one thing that is really strong that I'm thinking about now is the mechanism shifting from thinking about it as kind of experiential knowledge or university knowledge or institutional knowledge, and thinking about collective knowledge gathering. So thinking about people movement assemblies, which have been going on and are part of like many struggles and many movements, how they come to agreements and collective action plans. And so I'm thinking about people movement assemblies as a way to ask what is the problem for a community, to ask what are the creative ideas and solutions, and then what are the action steps by which a community can agree upon and then move forward. And I think that that is the space where I want to live in terms of like reimagining what it looks like to think about education, and to see how that creates a space for the merging of both institutional and experiential knowledges that also build the spirit of collectivism that allows space for folks to move forward on an agenda that actually can galvanize and create and sustain momentum that would actually be a palpable threat to the machine of the right that already has kind of like a longer agenda and plan forward.
I'm here to address the question about accountability. So for like our organization, a lot of people that enter our organization don't know the difference between Israeli and Zionist. But I feel like we need to be accountable for that. And so like for new members, we try to have like workshops where we define terms and show that like there's Israelis in Israel who are actually against the occupation, or they're actually attacked by their government and arrested for speaking out against it. And Zionists are the ones that we are anti-against, because these are the ones that call for the occupation. And so like it's important to address these two terms and to show that Zionist doesn't automatically correlate to being Jewish. There are a lot of Christian Zionists in this world, and so that's like another address against anti-Semitism. It's like for people in your group who are inherently anti-Semitic and not explicitly, so like it's important to distinguish the terms. And also with Students for Justice in Palestine, there could be people in the group sometimes who want to stand for the Palestinian cause but won't want to work for like the Black cause or for LGBTQ rights. And for this, we try to have more dialogue about it and host workshops with these organizations. So when we do have this dialogue and these workshops, the members can see that the struggles actually mirror one another. So that's how we address our
Martin, you want to react?
Yeah, I would like to go back to the piece about education. So the thing with the education piece, it's a broad term, right? And a lot of things that with our mentors, our first followers, one of the things, we have 3 mentors who are students here at the U of I. They come through the system. When I say the system, the kingdom system. but they have a lived experience. We never want anybody to forget that lived experience. But the educational component is, unfortunately, here in America, there's this thing that we call meritocracy, right? If you don't have letters behind your name, PhD, MS, those different things, it kind of hushes you. One of the things that I tell my mentors, you have the lived experience, but unfortunately, since we're here in America, pick up a book, continue to read, continue to educate yourself. Educate yourself on a different level than just your lived experience, because what is important with that is that you have to be able to convey that lived experience to an audience in a way that they can understand. And that only comes from the formal education piece. But lived experience is the most important experience, because those are things that time, energy, and effort in your life has been poured into.
Thanks, Martin.
What was it? I can't remember the formulation. It was something of the university. The taking of the university. It's not the responsibility of the university. It's certainly not that. But I can't remember what the exact formulation. Yeah, maybe that.
Colonizing the common sense.
What strikes me about the universities in this country particularly is that we see the ultimate privatization of the university. The university is not a, it's my sister's reaction to it. It's got me thinking so much. Because the university really is an extension of the worst parts of private enterprise and of capitalism. There is no responsibility in the university. And I come from a generation that said, we're going to take that up. And we did in '68. We did in terms of the CIA and on campuses and challenging their right to be there. And now I see these campuses and I'm sort of stunned with how much they now serve the purposes of the privatization of wealth. They don't serve any longer making things available for people. I don't know a university that has committed itself to serve incarcerated people in this country. I'd like to see one that has done that in any serious way. Serious way. What we see instead are universities that are about the advancement of the private careers of people. That's one comment. The other comment is a very interesting comment about Zionism and Jews. I think it's very important to remember that the Zionists looked not only at Israel as a site, they also looked at Rhodesia as a site, which is very important because it meant that the Zionist movement was founded in racism and in the formulation of a supremacist order of things. And I'd love to have some of you comment further on that. But this question of the university is having any responsibilities, real responsibilities, to the masses of people, it's just the opposite. We go across this country and find universities that exist on the backs of poor people and working people. They mess up the neighborhoods of poor people and working people. They are the source of working people and poor people not being able to get any access to housing because they can't possibly compete with the kind of monies that are there. And privilege, my sister, it's an ethos of the university that you're supposed to be amongst the privileged elite.
Another question. About the comment was saying about a 1.4 billion prison that they want to run. And I would like to know, they raise a question that they want to go into cloud, and now I would just like to know what is the strategy that you're going to follow through on that. if it's going to be built and where. Because we went with Quixie to one of the areas, and it seems like you're building these universities for the elite, but you're building the prisons for blacks. So it's a university for blacks, a prison for blacks in the area. So that is just my observation that I see. Why are you building all these prisons in the black areas, but yet you have the elites having the luxury of the land?
We talk about solidarity. We have all these organizations that we're meeting right now. We're thinking about what we need to do, strategizing how to combat that. So again, it's one of those things that you have to be vigilant. And what the teams can be is we have to have people who have an awareness of what's going on. Because it's one of those things where they try to wait you out, and we talked about one of the questions was the challenges that we face. And the challenge that we really face is, from our side sometimes, is the sustainability of so those are those different types of things, because a lot of times here on campus we do have students that are a part of these organizations, and they come and they go. But me being from the community, it's my job, my duty to stand up and take the charge, take the lead with that. But I am fortunate to be a student here at U of I, and I learn a lot. I have a lot of respect, but at the same time, I'm a community member first.
I'm wondering if there's a way to not use the word program, but to use the word school. And even also the housing assembly, whether you could think of yourselves as a school. And I'm bringing that up because my experience with people who have had, let's just say, problems with housing, they're victims. They don't, and they basically they want to get it right. They want to have safe housing. They're not revolutionaries at first. You can't kick people down and have them so afraid and then actually think they'll have a revolutionary consciousness. Is somebody who has lost their apartment, are they going to think housing should be free? That's a statement that's so far afield from what most people think. They basically want their particular problem to be addressed. So I guess what all of you are saying about your programs, for me, it seems like you're also running schools in order to transform victimization for his followers. There you are, you're stuck, you can't get a job, you got that felony thing, okay. What makes you then turn into somebody that wants it good for all people? What makes you think that education should be free or anti-capitalist? A lot of people that are being kicked out are not anti-capitalists. And capitalism just didn't work for them, but it doesn't mean they're not going to continue to work for capitalism. So I guess the question that I'm asking is, because I also despair of the institutions of education in our country. Christopher Hedges, in his book about the death of the liberal class, talks about how, what I noticed when in 2000, the faculty, except for some of the faculty in this room, would never show up for our street protests in this town. They would, you'd have your dissertation on radical pedagogy as a feminist, you could have somebody study under, but you never saw her bring herself over to any of the things that we were doing. And that was different in the 80s, where teachers would show up, but they're not showing up anymore. So I'm kind of diverging, but I'm just wondering to what degree your programs are really schools. You're educating people.
In the conversations that we've been having over the idea of political schools emerged as a key element of organizing in some points more than others. So I don't know if you want to respond to it. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. As housing assembly, we call ourselves sometimes the university of the people, because we learn from our own experiences and then create our own theory. We now have what we call housing assembly political school that we host annually. People that are being affected by the housing crisis might not be really revolutionaries. But then we understood that through neoliberal capitalism, we won't have the gains that the working class and the poor are actually looking for. So, where is the problem? What makes the poor or the working class not to actually access decent housing? There is this problem. So what we do, we actually educate our people about the crisis and then who is behind the crisis. Because we want to run away that the white monopoly capital, the financial banks, the property developers are actually making lives of the poor and the working class difficult to actually access their housing. And then the very same damn government that's supposed to actually deliver the services to the poor is being captured by this elite that is actually behind the policy formation. So how do we conscientize our people? Because there is one thing that we don't really acknowledge and understand, that these masses that are being oppressed, they actually are the people that got most power. So the question is, how do we reclaim power back to the people? So those are the spaces whereby we conscientize our people. That's why we call ourselves University of the People.
Anybody else wants to?
Okay, I just want to engage a bit with Carmen Craigs's comment. Just from some of the developments that we're seeing on our own campus in relation to the attack on the BDS movement. What I think that things have shifted so much. You've raised the question of the multiple sites. Uganda was also one of them. I think it was Rhodesia, Uganda, there were some countries in South America as well that were candidates. But the approach has been quite different of what we're seeing in South Africa, where they have attempting to identify, you have, I don't know, you've got a student union, we call them student representative councils, are taken on propaganda tours. But now they have kind of adapted the tactic to take sections of the black movements on those tours, to drive a wedge between the historical connection between the Palestinian movements and the Southern African movements, basically exploiting some of the contradictions and weaknesses within our own country, where you will find maybe Indian populations in South Africa aligning themselves in post-apartheid towards the Palestinian issue and away from some of the other issues that affect other communities, right? And this creates the opportunity for a gap, where an analysis that is exploiting the tension between that people are feeling across racial lines is used to weaken the solidarity for Palestine. So I think that it's becoming harder to make the point that you're making, that this could have been any one of us, because people, I think, are seeing themselves about what is also their interest. And I think that, as we're seeing, Israel has gone on many tours to African presidents in the last year or so, that many of the leads are identifying at the moment with the United States and Israel as being the better bet. So I think that it's very important for progressive blocks within the students and the labor movements to continue that strong link with the support for causes like the self-determined and liberation of areas like Palestine. But we will forever, I think, remain exposed by some of the weaknesses that we really often speak about in these kinds of spaces, which are some of the contradictions within the left bloc and some of the consequences of not dealing with racism amongst ourselves.
So I'm motivated to just add a little personal reflection from Tepolani's comment. One of the phrases that stay in my mind whenever I meet people in the housing assembly, they have a saying that we are poor, but we are not stupid. All right, meaning they claim for themselves the right to think. That's very important. So I wanted to just share that again. That's a very slogan that's comes out of South African movement change.
I mean, working with First Followers, we're a small organization. We're trying to become a bigger organization with building a base. And so I'm interested to hear from the organizations that are a bit bigger and have more experience of base building. I think both BYP 100 and ATU talked about base building, and I know Housing Assembly has a lot of experience. I'm interested in hearing, what is your decision-making structures? How do you develop policy? What kind of leadership structure do you have? I mean, I think Housing Assembly is like a national structure, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that. But as you've grown so far, how have you had to change your leadership structure or your decision-making structure? I think this follows up some of what Dara was trying to ask. How do you maintain accountability as you get bigger and bigger? You can't necessarily get everybody in, in a living room or in a room this size to make decisions. How do you manage to do that without losing the democratic process?
Okay, Housing Assembly in the city of Cape Town, it operates in 6 districts. We have roughly plus minus 8,000 in the city in terms of membership. Building a base, I won't lie, it's not an easy thing to do. It needs a lot of commitment, and then it needs relevant grassroots activities that actually speaks directly to people's needs and demands. So one of the ways that we used to actually build the base, and then it actually works for us because we do the door-to-door activity, whereby we are not there with the intention of pamphleteering, but then with the intention of sharing experiences. Getting those experiences from different people, turning them into pamphlets that we use as a mobilization tool, because a backyarder issue from the so-called colored area is not different from the backyarder in the black area. So we use such tactics as to mobilize the base. But then in terms of decision making, we've got what we call office bearers, and then we've got the EXCO, and then we've got the steering committee. So the steering committee consists of about 31 members that are actually running the organization, that actually reflect as to, are we going back, are we going forward, where are we lacking, where do we need to improve. So we've got what we call district leadership. So for the steering committee to come together, it will include the office bearers and then the district leadership from each and every district. So that makes the steering committee, that's where the decisions are being made. But then in order to take now strategic organizational decision, there is what we call a coordinating committee in the absence of an AGM, whereby we can make amendments in terms of constitution and stuff, whereby we can recall the leadership if we feel not satisfied. So it's whereby we invite about 50 people per district. So we've got about a base of 300 people that sit together and make strategic decisions about the organization and stuff. But then in terms of the campaign now has became nationally, because we once set at ILRIC Globalization School last year, September, whereby there were about 150 comrades nationally and internationally, and then we proposed the campaign to become a national campaign. So it is growing and growing, and then some of the organizations, even nationally now, have seized their name and became Housing Assembly constituencies. So that's how we keep on growing our base. And then we do what we call a consistent community political education, which is key to whatever we do as an organization. There is a follow-up of political education, because people must be able to actually speak to their issues rather than somebody being there to actually speak onto the issues. We say everyone an organizer, so speak direct your issues, be able to actually engage government on your own capacity rather than the so-called leadership, people that will have the information. We make sure that the information is being disseminated so that you are all in the same page.
Yeah, so I think echoing very much similar sentiments. When we first encountered tenants coming into our asambleas, which are twice a month on the second and the fourth Saturday, and they're public open meetings. And any tenant can come into that space to learn a little bit more about collective knowledge about the renters' rights. They talk, or sometimes, many of the times, they come to that space because they're already in crisis, right? They already receive a 30 days notice, and they want to learn a little bit more about what kind of support, or what is the next step, or what is possible to do to hopefully try to extend or have some kind of conversation with their landlord. And the first step within that space is to make sure that they acknowledge that this is not an individual problem that they're facing because of being in the wrong time at the wrong place, but that there's actually a whole group of individuals that are facing the same struggle in their same community. And so that starts creating more of a collective identity. And I think the sharing of the story when the first person comes in and they share what kind of crisis they might be facing with their landlord or housing situation, all of a sudden opens the space for others to do the same and for them to start collectively deciding what is going to be the collective planning and decision-making process of to take action. And I think that's very much necessary when talking about what is the best process of creating accountability procedures or process, right? Because if the individuals that are part of that collective really make the decision of what the next step is going to be, how they're going to take direct action, then there's nothing but to hold each other accountable in that process. And so when talking about that collective action and like how we do our work, then we have a structure around how then, after seeing that possibility of collectivity and collective knowledge and thinking, then how you can join ATU. And so we have the asambleas, which are twice a month, and this very public open space that tend to have a political education aspect of it, right? But that tends to be very flexible. We try to make it very flexible as well, knowing that many of the times we also can expect to have new people completely to come in, and that we need to do kind of like a quick intro, flexible space for them to be able to share and get to know a little bit more about ATU and how we can support each other, and making sure that it's really understandable or understanding that it is not a service, that we are there all as volunteers, as tenants, supporting one another, and that yes, some of us have much more knowledge around our renters' rights in the city of Chicago, but at the end of the day, many of us came to that space also knowing nothing about it. And so that is a moment of empowerment for them to see that others are taking that step. After Asamblea, then we have committees, and we have 5 different committees that serve a purpose within ATU, from media and finance, political education, outreach, and external relationships. And then we have Coordinación, which is the steering committee of ATU that tends to take a lot of the decision-making of the actual building tenant union formation campaigns that we have on. And so that tends to be once a week that the founders, co-founders of ATU, and now individuals that started from just coming to asambleas and that have been developed through our leadership development process that we're still kind of identifying what that really means and looks like, have now joined that Coordinación and are now taking building campaigns with other organizers into fighting the eviction and gentrification that we're seeing in the neighborhood.
Yeah, so a lot of what my comrades have already said are some of the elements. I just want to speak specifically on a different level of how we try to democratize the space and make it a human space. So this UIP 100 came out of a space where folks were looking for protection, were looking for some type of place of being and belonging and identifying problem, and also being able to have like safe space, quite honestly. And some of the principles of UIP 100 is that it's Black, but it's also queer feminist space. So that component of it has remained like a really strong principle that we have to be accountable to at all times. And so some of the ways for me, I can say that I've appreciated our space being different in how we approach it, is that it's also very like family friendly. I don't know how else to say it, but we have children in our space, and the children aren't just like under the table, they're like under the chairs, but they're actually engaged, they lead things, they do chants, they they're asked to present themselves and how they're feeling and, you know, what they think about things. There's food, because a lot of the time these meetings are in the evenings, and you're asking people who are volunteering their time to come and strategize, but then what are we providing for folks to stay in that space and feel comfortable in that space? So there's like some very specific, like just basic human things that we do that I really, really appreciate, that allow me to actually go from being a volunteer to being a volunteer leader, and then so on. And then in terms of structures, the way that we do it is similar to there's a steering committee that's called the core group, and then there's also, we have multiple city chapters, so there's like a national core group, and then the meetings are all volunteer member based, so all the decisions are collective membership decisions. So nothing happens without the full chapter leadership being in agreement with it. Trying to think. And also there's opportunity for us to be reflective of our practice and how it's impacting folks on the ground. So there was one such direct action that we did that was in Chicago at Home and Square, which is a site where many black and brown bodies are disappeared. And so we went to do a direct action on that place, and the people living in that particular neighborhood on the west side of Chicago were like, y'all, we want y'all to stay here. And some of the members, there was a vacant lot by where we were doing the direct action, and so some of the members actually set up a tent city for about 38 days and occupied that space. And so those children and those mothers, I mean, there was a pregnant mother who got the support to go to the hospital to have her child, who got all the things she needed for her newborn. In that time period, there were children who got school supplies for the upcoming school year in that time period, free water, free food, free art programming that was all donated from people in the organization and other organizations that we work with. So just being open to the opportunities for us to build also goes back to that thing about building base. It's like, how are you just engaging with people's needs, immediate needs, while knowing that you have like these longer things that you're trying to execute, or some of the things I will offer in terms of like how we've been able to stay organized in terms of like strict organization, like we have to do these things, blah, blah, but then also make sure that we stay in tune with being human.
Going off what everybody else said, I want to address how important it is to have like an organization or a movement board be filled with people who are directly affected by it. Because like for Students for Justice in Palestine, like I think it's so important to have a Palestinian as like running the organization and like part of the exec members, because like it appeals to other Palestinians on campus because they feel like their voice is going to be correctly represented. And I say this because like if it's like a person who's not of color running like Students for Justice in Palestine, then like people who are not of color will join the organization, and then Palestinians will not have their voice and they'll be marginalized. So I just think it's really important that if your cause is representing a group, that group be the head of that cause. Yeah.
My name is Julia Gila. I'm in the sociology department. Once I was an activist, and I still like to think of myself as a professor activist. So I'm listening to you, and I certainly understand the importance of building these horizontal, transnational linkages, alliances, and relations of solidarity. But I wonder if that is sufficient. Don't you think that in order to be effective and successful in whatever it is that you endeavor to achieve, you have to have a SOPA, that this is an ugly term, a buy-in from the upper echelons of society. Let me give you an example. In the earlier stages of capitalism, if the capitalists didn't raise the wages of the working class, there would not be enough purchasing power to buy the products of, whatever was produced in those corporations. There was a movement to subsidize or make vaccinations free, because if the poor kids didn't get vaccinated, the whole society could be affected. But I feel like, and I think there are more and more studies pointing to this bifurcation of all of our societies, where the upper echelons can increasingly buy themselves out from being affected by the same things, the same public problems, public infrastructure, the decay of our schools, our roads, our you know, all of the things that we encounter every day or the food that we eat. So how do you create a boomerang effect? How do you make what you do count for the people on top? Because your example is wonderful. I mean, Rahm Emanuel, why, or the landlords, why on earth would they care? I mean, you guys, from their perspective, you guys are just down there, little kids playing in the sandbox. You will never amount to much unless you have allies in the highest parts of society. So how do you do that? How do you make it count for those people on top so they pay attention to you? And I'm not just talking about politicians, obviously.
Any questions? Everyone wants to know what you make?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one thing that, and I don't have much to say about this because I don't know how much I jive with that idea, but one thing I will say though, is like people in power hate to be embarrassed. They hate it. So when you try to embarrass them every time, it's like, yeah.
They have no shame.
Oh no, they do. When their friends are looking at them in their public shame, then they start to care. Rahm is on a campaign right now saying that he's a sanctuary mayor. He's doing a federal lawsuit against Trump because he wants to get his public image cleaned up after Laquan and like killing the black and brown bodies and being the mayor that is over is regarded as the most violent city in the United States. And he's looking to redeem himself so he can get reelected. And so we know what fiddle they play to. We know that public shame is not good for their image, it's not good for their global image on the global stage and the power that they say they have versus what they actually literally have. And also the bottom line for them is like still being able to get financial contributions to be able to stay in office. So I think that that's a powerful tool that we do have and that has continued to be strong in all social movements is being able to put a light on just how malicious folks in power are. But that's kind of my only offering.
So, I think that when we talk about Rahm Emanuel, for example, right, OCAD and BYP 100 have been invited by the Rahm's office and administration to have these conversations around expand sanctuary and to negotiate with us. And that's because they understand the power that we have, which is people's power, right? They understand that if they don't want to negotiate and talk to us, then they'll have us on the street and then we'll be making a direct action demonstration that will be highlighted everywhere in the city of Chicago. And that his image will be damaged by that. When dealing with landlords and we do calling campaigns and we do delegations to their offices, the next day we get a call back or the tenants get a call back to try to set up a meeting, right? Because at the end of the day that is successful, that when you do try to damage their public image, people care, and regardless of how they want to present it, whether they want to present it as, I want to work with these community groups to get their feedback, I want to work with the tenants that are part of the building that I own, but at the end of the day, we know that the reason why they're even starting that conversation is because we already hit them, and we already hit their public image, and that they are aware that if they don't respond to us, we're only going to keep escalating to more and more. And so I would just stay away from kind of this rhetoric of we only are going to be able to get power by joining that elite or those elected officials or by having connections directly to them, because we believe that the people have much more power because there's so much many of us, right? And if we're successful at base building, then we'll really be able to accomplish much more, many things, and that we will be able to address.
Well, building on this idea about naming and shaming, the issue was, do the South Africans, I mean, do they think the government has any shame, or does the VC of UCT have any shame, or does the sheriff have any shame?
They all need legitimacy.
Too broad. Okay, so, I mean, is it worth naming and shaming Zuma, or is that beyond shame? I don't know, you keep it. Anyway, this is, I don't know if anybody wants to respond to the question of, well, what are the building allies, or do we, name and shame?
I think building the allies we should target the middle class. But you know what, middle class people, they don't want to be associated with the poor and the unemployed and the blacks and all those type of people that they think it's not worthy to be associated with. And I think what the teachers union and pop crew, the police and all those type of people in that area, where we say we need to tap into those comrades in that middle class. Because you must remember, at the end of the day, if you don't speak to the issues at hand, they won't realize the importance of things that's happening. Now, some of them will say, no, but I have a house. Why must I still be associated with you and think about housing? I have a house. But there is some teachers that is so in debt that can't afford a house, that is working for extended families. Now what we say in Housing Assembly, let us speak to the things that affects those middle class ones. Because you will have the ones, water is very expensive, electricity is very expensive. At the end of the day, those are the type of things that are affecting those comrades in that level of class. So if we don't have something that connects us to those middle class and elites, how are we going to organize? So we need to bring them down and say, listen, these are the things that's affecting us. And at the end of the day, yes, you will be able to afford it now. 5 years down the line, will you be able to afford electricity and water? So we need to mobilize and talk to these structures about how we can and see this government or capitalism, how can we attack these big structures and these rich people out there, how can we just chip on it slowly by slowly, because at the end of the day, it's going to pick us. Everybody's going to do it. You will have also your family that is going to be dependent on you. So why can't we talk about these things? Another thing also, comrades, that we don't like to talk about is the race issue. Because when it comes to racism, because racism is rife. And talking about racism is a very sensitive topic. And people will say, oh, I'm not affected by racism. But comrades, at the end of the day, when you want unity, we need to address the racism. Because we fight amongst one another, but the enemy is outside. So the energy that we're wasting amongst ourselves, why don't we use it and fight the capitalists outside it? So that is just 5 cents.
So yeah, that's more than 5 cents. It's like a $50 5 cents. I don't know who wants to go to the big R question right now. I saw 2 other hands.
My name's Scott. I'm with the Autonomous Tenants Union. And speaking of 5 cents, I think one of the ways to get the attention of the elites is through attacking them through their money. I think, like as Antonio was talking about with the call-in campaigns that we do towards landlords and the different actions we do in hurting their public image, is that they respond to that ultimately because it's costing them money. If we're doing a call-in campaign and jamming their phone lines, those are people who could be calling to book a viewing to see an apartment that they want to lease, or some of their other clients. And so it's about hitting them where it hurts with their money. But I also think I just want to push back a little bit on that too, because I think especially our 2 organizations haven't resigned ourselves to having to necessarily appeal to the whims of the elite, but also thinking about what are alternatives to the current systems that we have and how we can take those folks out of the equation, right? How do we have community control of land and housing that makes it so that we don't have to negotiate with the landlord, or we don't have to do that, and how we can build power that way instead.
So, can I follow up?
Yeah. Okay, I want to recognize 2 hands, but it's a follow-up to that, so I will allow you to follow up.
Yeah, so has the idea of creating cooperatively owned housing blocks come up? And what James has been a star of is crowdsourcing. So So creating these alternative institutions and alternative financing mechanisms, is that something that you are involved in, or? As I'm undocumented and be in this struggle to be in rent, and these increases of rents in Albany Park is really hard. About your question, why we don't work with the elite, I don't really want to spend time and energy with these people. Instead of that, I think like we are more, the poor people is more than them. I prefer spend my time trying to aware people what we can do with our power. The power of people is more than that the money that they have. So if just in Albany Park, I'm just talking like in that space, if we make like the community understand the power that we have as our renters, and we put the landlords in problems with their money, right? Like Antonio says, like if we go campaigns and all these things, or even if when they buy the buildings, right, they increase the rents and they evict the people, the poor people, especially Latinos. They kick it out. And we fight of these buildings and we create problems to them, because if they want to send us to court, they need to spend money on the court, they need to spend money on the lawyers, they need to spend money in the buildings to repair and all these things. So they're gonna think twice to buy another buildings, because we are there, and we are organized people to fight back against these landlords that even they don't live in Albany Park, they live in other parts, and they go there just to hurt our community because they want profits on that. So we need to be prepared to that, and we need to be prepared to fight back against that. So I don't want to spend time trying to work with that people. I prefer to spend time with my people and organize them in that way.
And we talked a lot about having access to like free education, what education means, and having like spaces to organize and activate, engage your communities and things like that. And in my opinion, I think that we're fortunate, my college is fortunate to be one of the few that actually does do a lot of public work and engage with citizens, engage with people, and like set up community spaces and like actually go out to make sure that these things can happen. And I think I kind of want to know just like what can library professionals do, or maybe like information professionals, as my college is starting to shift into like a little bit more of the corporate sector, but like still like we provide information and knowledge and services to people. Like what are things that maybe we could focus on, or what we could do to provide these levels of education and knowledge and community spaces for these things to happen?
There are databases that are useful in finding information on landlords, for instance, or I don't know if other folks have, you know, whatever the enemies are in their respective organizations. I think information on these people is really key. So if you want to make, I don't know, sneak people in and use it and give them the login.
Yeah. I think that overall as ATU, we also have a process of data collection. We are tracking evictions and displacement in our communities by the work that we're doing, and we're also tracking recently sold properties in Albany Park continuously. And we can do this by just looking at public data in order to use it as a tool to go and canvass those buildings prior to those buildings and those tenants receiving 30 days notices by the new owner that just bought the building, because continuously we're seeing that as the pattern, that these corporate landlords buying the building and then within a month or 3 months or sometimes the next day after they did the closing, they're giving 30 days notices to the tenants. And so we're trying to be proactive, trying to reach the tenants prior to that 30 days notice in preparation of expecting that, but also in preparation of them forming a union and then defending themselves with legal tactics that I won't go on beyond a lot in that. But just to kind of answer that, right? Like research around the alternative creation. In ATU, we have a community garden that we were able to develop out of the taking in collaboration with the Chicago Park District and a vacant land in Albany Park. And now it's a thriving community garden that is development without displacement. So we are thinking about those alternatives. What we are finding difficult is that we know that there's co-ops, we know that there's a community land trust model, but how do we get the funding to even start those projects when it's ATU, where only a new organization that's been around for a year, we don't have a budget to do any of those projects. So what is the research of what places, what banks, what institutions, no strings attached, of course, can really provide that funding to create those alternatives for the community that we're working with.
Okay, I saw 3 hands, and I know, I hope you guys are budgeted for at least another half an hour or so. But I also have been reminded by artists and other humanists here that humans can do other things. And there are other left sides to their brains that work, and there's a strong South African tradition that realized, so I invite the South Africans quickly for a 5-minute alternative expression of what they mean and how they engage with solidarity. So those groups who were, displaying their skills, maybe 5 minutes. Kashifa, do you want to share quickly, just as a quick break?
You don't have to.
Just to change gears slightly before we come back to the kind of thinking and talking stuff. I mean, artists always remind us, and there's many in the room here that we are other faculties. So, no, maybe Kashifa.
Yes, or
yes, 5 minutes go. Let me go. Right, get around, please.
Yeah, you need that.
My boss was a dictator. He was an exploiter. Who is the that's why I'm a shop steward. I'm a shop steward. I'm a shop steward. My father was a criminal. My father was a criminal. That's why I'm a activist. I'm an activist. I'm an activist. My teacher was a victim. My teacher was a victim. That's why I'm an activist. I'm an activist. I'm an activist. My student was specialized. My student was specialized. That's why I'm an activist. I'm an activist. I'm an activist. The same for me. That's why I'm an activist. I'm an activist. I'm an activist. That's why I'm an activist. That's why I'm an activist. That's why I'm an activist. 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 I'm an activist.
We know from painful struggle we sing better together. We work together. So we'll do with what works. Anyway, that was a good energizer. So now back to the kind of hard labor, paying attention. Anisha and David. I had a hand in front of you, but just go ahead.
Respond to your question about about, what the library, science, and information can do. Well, obviously, another great issue is corporatization of information itself. And so there's a lot of work around keeping the commons, the knowledge commons, and also actually a group in my other hat with my friend Rob. We're part of a group called May First People Link, and it's essentially providing a non-corporatized email server to movements for actually using technology as a revolutionary movement. So if you would like to become a member of that group and work with, I think I know lots of movement organizations that are part of it.
Great, thanks for the comment. We have 2 more hands. You want to go ahead and then David?
And then, so I'm Jean Boucher. I came down from Michigan State. I'm a sociologist. So I finished my PhD a couple years ago and learned that we have inequality now in the U.S. we haven't had in 90 years. And I used to think about my professors and try to think of, because sociology just revolves around inequalities, right? Racial, economic, environmental, you name it. And I couldn't imagine how they could have stayed in the discipline, or what is the discipline doing when inequalities are increasing, and I'm studying ways to try to reform, And I think the same thing of criminologists. When I job hunt, there's all kinds of criminologist jobs, but the school to prison track line is just growing and growing. So like, well, what the hell is going on here? Right? So I've spent some time as an activist, and I guess I'm getting to a question. I'm really inspired by everybody here, but then I also can identify with your statement about like we're just little people playing in a sandbox. And I love the comments about shaming, and I think shaming is a really important place. Where are people's vulnerable parts, their soft spots? Where is their public face? And how can we sort of... But I'm also wondering too, because I don't want to silence anybody, right? Where else are these kind of clever strategies, right, that we can share with each other as we sort of all, I'm in academia, you're on the streets, where can we meet and share these clever strategies? I'm also with a group called Climate First, and we're picking on banks. And which are the banks that are still funding coal mountaintop removal? Which banks are still funding pipelines, right? And we target those banks, and we specifically pick on one bank, right, and continue, and then slowly they're changing, but there's still these massive, massive forces.
Thank you, John. So I'll take David's question.
Yeah, I'll be extremely brief. I'm thinking about the whole issue of what we struggle against. And I think an important point that Juju made was that that one struggles against, or one struggles on behalf of trying to get elites to buy into progressive agendas because they see it in their own best interest. But I think there's something else at work. And I think that elites in this country, in our cities, have been notorious for muffling the voices of the poor. And notorious not so much that the voices are not allowed to speak, but they're not listened to. And they're not listened to because they're held up to be the voices of the irrational, the voices of extremism. And it gets to me at the whole process of constituting identities, and how the struggle has to be waged over how, or who controls the levers of building how we see people, how we understand people. And that should be a central source of struggle, in my opinion, to liberate people to truly hear the voices of the poor.
I just wanted to say that I have felt very inspired in the last week or a few days of conversation. I couldn't say that maybe a month ago, but I could see how, as these bigger powers are becoming more stronger, but also those fish that Tembelani was showing, actually the small fish have found each other. I mean, I could hear the whole conversation about sanctuary city and deportation and eviction. They're all kind of finding each other around the issue of displacement, and even incarceration. That is a struggle against displacement. It's displacing people to warehousing them in the prisons. So in some way, the convergence of these movements and how, like, creation of OCAD in Chicago, that the anti-deportation movement have joined force with anti-eviction movement, and they have created this anti-displacement. It's amazing. I mean, it's wonderful that as they became more greedy and terrible and powerful, on this side also, these smaller movements have found language of each other, and the anti-brutality of police and Sanctuary for All has found the anti-deport. You see, so these are all great signs, and so I have found a lot of inspiration in what has been the conversations. Thank you.
Rob, thanks.
So I want to kind of weave a thread through this reaching out to the elites and the powers. I agree much with Guillermo here. The methodology of Take Back the Land was one to be very intentional about not dealing with the folks that got us into the struggles that we're in. We were very clear about that. A shameless plug, tomorrow I'll present an actual case study of how that was done and how we won that way, right? And it was through a campaign of getting the media to believe us, right, and have conversations with us. And by that, and when I say right-wing media, International Business Times interviewing us and challenging big corporate structures because our message resonated. So it can be done, but you have to be very intentional about it. So I agree with Guillermo. Our efforts need to be within the people that we're organizing. That's where the power that comes. But a quick case study, one quick way to do this. So some of us in New York supporting the Asian community, a landlord that was pushing people out of Chinatown, found out where this guy lived, right? And we would show up every Sunday when the community is going to church to tell them about the morality, the lack of morality within their neighbor, right? And really have a conversation with folks on their way to church. And that man was so embarrassed into a conversation that he sold the building to a righteous landlord, which happened to be a community development corporation. But it took about a month of us showing up and organizing ourselves across organizations. We're going to support the Asian community because we're going through this shit in our own community, right? But right now, the Asian folks are feeling this a little bit harder than we are. So in that cold January month, we need to be out there every Sunday in that neighborhood of College Point, targeting that guy's house. And his neighbor's like, that's my neighbor? That's what he's doing to people? And it ended that quickly. So it can be done. And I think there's a culture in this country amongst social justice groups not to share tactics and strategies. We need to get better at it. So everybody knows I've encouraged this collaboration because I think across borders, it becomes apparent how much we can accomplish when we come together and the things that surface, as Faranak said, through these conversations and some of the things that happen. So, you know, shameless plug for tomorrow, we'll give you a case study, but I think there are, outside of Take Back the Land, there are other folks that are doing this and winning, right? So how do we get that information? How do we communicate to one another? And maybe it's through some of that technology that Manisha just talked about that is free and clear for all of us to use. Sure.
So, okay, let me continue this theme of shameless plugs. Since we're talking about shaming. Tomorrow morning, if you've been inspired by these conversations, they're going to continue in a different format at 9 a.m. in Temple Buell Hall. Please pick up one of these. We'd love to hear your contribution and your ideas. I'm going to leave the last 15 minutes or so to the panelists to kind of wrap up. But I wanted to just maybe flag what seems to be bubbling up. This is a term that's surfaced already about shifting from a political economy also to the model economy. So, you know, that's a key aspect of what we need to maybe take more seriously. That seems to be one aspect. Then I want to get back to Kashifa's insightful but not surprising from a South African perspective. If any of you want to really deal with this, the big R, the racism that is infecting our own organizations, right? That's preventing us from seeing each other as collaborators or even as fellow human beings. So I'll just put that out there, and then you guys want to respond to that, or Michael wants to put a gloss to that.
Can I amend your question today?
Please.
I mean, because she was pointing about racism
is I'd be as interested to hear not so much what's going on within your organizations, but to understand how you situate it within a larger context. You know, you can't talk about private property in this country without talking about racism. I mean, the origins of private property is racism, right? The origins of the nation, the origins of the state. So I wonder if, I think what I heard was, it's not that it's a very question about within our organizations and within our communities, but how deep it is structurally in our everyday practices. And so when you talk about homelessness or incarceration or the power of the state or power of private property, it's not so much about, you know, segments of the elite, but it's the origins of our society and our language. So the question is, how do we teach ourselves about the origins of this place? And you have your own stories to you know, in terms of reparations, to understand how deep racism is, how it's been structured in the nature of property. I mean, there's a wonderful book called Colored Property, which explains exactly the origins of real estate in Chicago, Detroit, and others, as fundamentally about racializing access to space, to real space. And I think that I'd like to hear the conversation a little more deeply about this relationship between racism and your political, you know, your political thoughts.
Yeah, so again, these are huge questions that come in at the tail end. 5 cents contribution, they turn to be $5 million contributions. But again, this is what I thought, maybe just to talk in terms of the theme of solidarity and connections, how they're overcoming these sort of barriers, including, of course, the other big, I don't know, shall we say it, at this late stage, sexism. I mean, that hasn't really been, but I think in the sense of more later. So I want to afford you each a minute or two if you want to closing remarks.
Closing remarks. Yeah. Okay. I think I'll propose to you, Ken, because in Housing Assembly we strongly believe in women leadership, and then I think this cake has been big. We understand. So I feel strongly that I will be unfair to eat this cake alone. I think I should give to my comrade to actually do the closing.
We can go and then.
Well, I just want to maybe I'll close by responding to some of the questions, and I don't like to sloganeer, and I think what one says should match the power behind what they're saying. We're still a small organization, we're still building, but I believe to my core that what we're doing is the right thing to do, and that's the way we're going to change things. And what I want to say is that there are irreconcilable differences between tenants and landlords, between owners of corporations and workers, and between the owners of corporations and people who want to use this earth as a fucking habitat, you know? Yeah. So I don't want to collaborate with them. And they're not going to fund us taking away their property, you know? They're not going to give it up. So what we have to do is maybe begin talking about this. Begin talking about, like, we got to take away property from these fuckers because they're destroying our habitat, you know? And that's going to affect everyone. So, you know, like I said, I don't like to slogan here, but we have to be clear, at least on this point, you know, and continue to work towards it. And maybe the academics in the room, if we start talking about expropriation, then begin disseminating it as common sense among your colleagues, you know, and don't say that's too extreme, because that's what we need to do.
Well, just more detail on expropriation. What do you mean by that?
Taking away some force taking away their property. It's no longer theirs. That's why maybe the collaboration we could have is if landlords want to give up their property to us, we'll take it. No strings attached, but then they would cease to be landlords. That's the contradiction, right? So some force has to do it. I don't know if it's the state. I don't know these questions, but maybe that's for y'all to think about.
That was awesome. So I'm just thinking about how how diverse the problems are and how diverse the solutions have to be and how diverse our ways of approaching it has to be, and really pushing away from like just being narrow vision, or if we're going to be focused on one thing and be diligent on one thing, be in constant collaboration with other folks, right? I think that collaboration piece is the biggest part. And I think one thing I want to underscore that I think I talk about every time I make a comment kind of implicitly, but I want to make it really explicit, is the personal, the I, right? Like we've been swallowing this shit personally in our lives, generationally, and there are pieces of our mind, and for some of us, and I include myself, whole chunks that are still colonized, and I think that we have to name that and own that, and be able to be as reflective and introspective and like in isolation working on ourselves, right? Because we're coming into space carrying that stuff, and all of it can't be attributed to the systems only, but how we regurgitate and manifest those systems again in personal space. So I think for me, it's about accepting that we look at the world differently. We're not supposed to look at it all the same, but in the different ways that we look at the world, it's supposed to give us new, creative, and better, and building expansive ideas about how to solve the problems. So just the personal, right, and like finding alignment between the personal, political, and also honoring the diversity that we have in the world to solve things together.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to address is that a lot of organizations don't make it clear in their constitutions that they're anti-Zionist, and it seems that a lot of people forget about Palestine, and the Palestinian community has just been marginalized for way too long, and I think it's important that like whether your organization is small or big, it's so important to put anti-Zionist within your constitution and to stand in solidarity with Palestinian people as we've been facing occupation for over 70 years. And I feel like we need to hold everything accountable when it comes to anti-Zionism, such as our universities, which actively donate to Israel's army or support that investments into Israel's army. And it comes from the larger problem, which is the U.S. I mean, the U.S. actively donates $3.8 billion from our tax dollars every year to Israel's army that kills Palestinians and evicts them from their home. And so I think it's really important that we need to start small within the organizations, and like I feel like SJP always like works with like black movements or like LGBTQ, but like we can start working with like incarceration movements also, because a lot of Palestinians have been incarcerated over the past few months and for over 70 years. So like I feel like the Palestinian movement can stand in solidarity with a lot of other movements, and it just starts in one place.
The first thing I forgot to mention is that the booklets that you would have gotten in at the beginning, there's 3 of them, so they're different, so you'll have to speak to each other to find out what the other one says. The other one is that some of the stuff that we're trying to do is and it's relevant for what I'll conclude with, is to be as non-sectarian as possible, but to be relatively clear about our orientation, right? And in that, I mean that the pieces that you have are not the mandate or manifestos of particular organizations, but a reflection of the kinds of people that are moving through the spaces that are trying to work towards certain issues and identify with the common campaign. And I think that that's a space that we need to move into, because you might articulate some of these things as, let's say, the city of Chicago or the neighborhood, but when I came here, that's not really what I saw. I think that there's a much more complicated aspect of what's happening in the city that is not properly captured by even thinking about American. I mean, the immigration issue is the easiest way to see it, but it's not fully captured in the notion of the American citizen or an American issue. As there are some large parts of the world are represented in some of the neighborhoods, and that has to be engaged with. But we haven't mentioned the sort of the specter of war and the extent of what is being lost and what has been lost. And I think that it's like a little bit of a dangerous historical amnesia, maybe. Either maybe everybody knows it and I'm the one out of the loop. That's also possible. But some movements like the Fremont Mandela movement and anti-apartheid movements were really strong in the United States. So what happened there? What can we learn from that? And so what is the context of our meeting here today? and I suppose the intentionality of bringing the South Africans, the Palestinians, the UIP, the ATU, is something that I suppose that people are trying to say. But we are not, I don't know if we are yet at a point where we can engage with the extent to what has been lost. And I'm finding that at home as well, where there's I understand it to be a deep pain, I guess, about the loss that was faced from many of the liberation movements, about the possibilities for a new society. But I think I can fairly confidently say from the members of my generation who I'm close to, that there's a deep ignorance to the extent to which people have thought through certain aspects of the struggle. And I think that in spaces like this, we might want to move far and ask certain kinds of questions. We need to take some time to think back about what has been done and try before. Sure.
All right, so earlier when I spoke, I talked about me being an educator. So what I'm going to do is leave everybody with a homework. So there's 4 constructs, or 4 pillars I like to call them. And I would like for you all just to think about these and how do you put them all together to build a solidarity, right? So first is awareness. Just think about that. Just think about how do you become aware, how do you make people aware. The second one is empathy.
What was that?
Empathy. So think about that word as well. What does it mean? How do you convey that? How do you get people to know what that is? The third one is understanding. There's multiple perspectives, but can we all have a common understanding? And then the fourth one comes from Paulo Freire's, that critical consciousness that we all have to exercise at some point in our lives to make things come together and move in a unified direction. So to take those 4 constructs and just think about them, put them all together, and see how you can come up with solidarity. Thank you.
Great panel. Kashifa.
Well, you know, in South Africa we had that Truth and Reconciliation Commission discussion. But you know, those things happened. But if you go into South Africa, you will find that deep-rooted racism. It's still real. Yeah, you have the white suits racists, you have blacks, you have colors. Well, you know, within our organization, we also have those things. And what we did was, we have different districts where we bring each other together because we recruit in Kayalicha, northern suburbs, and Athlone. So what we're saying is we need to bring those different types of people together. Because at the end of the day, nobody will know what I understand of racism or why are people behaving like that. Now what housing is, a carrot is being kept in front of us. Now the blacks are saying, oh, the colors just what they're going to get the houses, and the blacks is saying, oh, the colors is getting the houses. So it's all about who is now important to get those houses. So that is also where we get this race, where people are get so angry that we don't want to talk to one another because of this thing where we are fighting now for this one goal. And I think within Housing Assembly we have this thing where we bring those communities together, and that is a space where we talk about this racism. Because at the end of the day, racism can't be just hanging there in a vacuum and nobody's talking about it, but we know those things is happening. So I think that is one of the areas in our organization where we talk about racism and we make people realize also it's no use we fighting amongst ourselves, because that is what capitalists want. They want us to fight amongst ourselves because at the end of the day they are going to gain. So comments on racism, it's very traumatic sometimes. Because sometimes it's so sensitive, people don't want to talk about it. And you will find even in white communities, when you talk about racism, some of them will turn because sometimes deep-rooted, you have that thing that you yeah, I'll listen to you, but when I go outside, I don't have time for this nonsense about these black people. Let them it up. That is this kind of sentiment that we do get in these organization governments. But at the end of the day, let us talk about these things that's affecting us in the community. And by doing that, I think that at the end of the day, our common goal should be the enemy of the capitalist government. That is where our power should be focused on, not amongst ourselves. Because at the end of the day, why are we fighting one another for what? More power? We don't have the money to buy things. We don't have the money to settle ourselves on an island. No, we need to face these communities on a daily basis. If you see, if you come back in 5 or 10 years' time, you will find that community is not there anymore. They've gone. There's rich people occupying now that space that you were at. So it's for you to sit together and talk to one another about the things that's affecting you and move it from there. And not let the jail fill up with black people and other colored people. Why should the jail be full? That is what capitalists are doing. They're filling up these jails, and that is how they take people out of the community also. Because those are the strong ones that they are removing from their community. So if we don't have the strong ones anymore, what is there? Nothing. So I believe race and gender is also another issue that we don't talk about. Where we say the women are being very submissive, we don't listen and we don't talk, we keep quiet. Congress is about time that women should stand up and talk what is right. Because what happened in our communities, in the housing assembly, we're empowering our women. Some of them are illiterate, they can't read and write. But talk about housing issues, they know their stories. But what some of us do, we step back so the men can take over and take control while we did all the groundwork. So what we say in the housing assembly, we need to let go of this pushing the men in front and having this thing about, no, he will articulate this discussion much better than let's put him there. We'll wait. That story doesn't work anymore. What we also say is, comrades, we need to empower women and we need to support women. But we're saying also, let women go into positions, but don't go in positions and then you don't want to transform one children. You need to transform when you're into those positions. Because women have this tendency when they're in positions, they take the route like the men. Their thinking is like men now, they forget where they came from. So we need to have this discussion also when we empower women for the better.
Thank you. So thank you to our panelists and to yourselves also. You one round of applause here. Again, if you want to, please continue this conversation. Join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Temple Buell Hall. The word I want to take away here personally is this idea, and thank you for suggesting it, of being inspired. So let the spirits move you, and if you need additional help to get the spirits to move you or other types of spirits, join us at the bread company after this. So please, some of us are going to get together. I'm sure there's a lot of energy. So at the bread company, we'll find a way to continue this dialogue. So thank you very much to everybody. I hope to see you tomorrow night.